morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure and privilege for me to contribute here to the Technical Committee's report. But first of all, I just need to pay tribute to the Chairman, Nico, for his leadership and energy. It's been great working on all of these terrifically interesting projects. Ut for cajoling and encouraging and reminding, and Ut, a great job, Mayor. Thank you for involving me. It's been great fun. We've always been striving for technical excellence, and that is to give technical support and firm grounding for the claims which we need to make in the marketplace. And in doing so, I believe that we're really setting the standard insofar as sustainability benchmarks go. We have developed methodologies which are unimpeachable. We really have done the right thing with regards to our research, and others who follow, competitors, will be hard-pressed to maintain this sort of standard. Nico has run through the major themes which we've had this year. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that the environmental life cycle assessment is completed, as well as the thermal performance study. I think sometimes UT has been kind of disbelieving that of my reports that we were actually nearly finished, because we've been nearly finished for about 6 months, and it's very frustrating in these final stages, I know. The Socio-Economic Life Cycle Assessment is in progress, and we have a new service provider, Willie Parsons, a highly accredited engineering and environmental consultancy, and I think we're going to be in good hands there. The sustainability tool looks good, and it is something that we may find others in the marketplace give us support with its rollout. And Nico has mentioned the possibility of tapping into Australian thoughts and research. The University of Newcastle, we hope there's some very valuable data which we can dip into there and learn from some of their experiences. And then, of course, we've had the routine activities which have been going on. I'm sure you're probably wondering how the dickens we're going to get the benefit out of a lot of this research that we've been doing, these studies. And I'm hoping that it's now going to start showing that aspect of how we're going to use this work. Each of you who contributed to the life cycle assessment, and my thanks again for your efforts at responding, each of you will receive a report which actually indicates where you are in relation to your peers, and insofar as a number of environmental indicators go. So, for example, on carbon emissions, on energy intensity, you'll be able to benchmark yourself, and you'll be able to benchmark your technologies against the others in the sector. And I'll throw up a couple of slides which will just give you an inkling of how this might be used. So it'll provide you with baseline data, and I think other building material manufacturers will now be able to compare against you guys in the clay brick industry, and they'll all have to benchmark themselves against you. I think architects will be in a better position. I've already had the odd query coming through from architects in the green building sector wanting to put together comparative data on various building systems. And we're going to find this LCA data can be slotted into some of these analyses. And of course, government, academia now has substantiated information, and they can assess the environmental impacts of clay brick on a fair basis. All right, the environmental life cycle assessment, what is it, where is it, who will it educate it, and when and how will we see the benefits? So hopefully I'm going to answer some of these questions, but it's here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the biggest technical or research project which I believe the CBA has ever undertaken. So it's in support of these 3 pillars of sustainability, and it does actually exist. And it actually, before I start to explain something about it, it gives me great pleasure to be able to hand it over to Atfutsia. At, you didn't believe perhaps that it was finished. It is now finished.
I'm handing it over to you.
So a significant investment by yourselves, a excellent bit of work by the University of Pretoria. The lead student who did this work got his master's degree cum laude. It has been recognized by the Swiss reviewers as being an excellent bit of work, and in the process we also have as an additional spin-off the thermal performance study, which I'm going to elaborate on a little bit further. But just to, for those of you who have not ever encountered this LCA concept, it is a across-the-board assessment of how your product performs in all stages from cradle through to grave, or firstly through to gate, and then ultimately the recycling stages are brought to account. And generally, if one follows the ISO 14040 or 44 processes, it'll go through a life cycle inventory where you examine all of the impacts over each stage, and then an impact assessment phase, and then finally all of the environmental performances are reviewed. So in the process we interrogated some 102 standalone clay manufacturing plants, 6 firing technologies across the board that you'll be familiar with. We followed each of the stages of the processes of your brick making, and we gathered information on global warming, for example, water depletion, which you'll all understand, acidification, and a whole host of other metrics which can be now publicized. So what are the results? And you'll see how the picture has developed somewhat surprising, or perhaps not surprisingly. The clamp kiln features quite highly in relation to, for example, global warming, but surprisingly some of the other tunnel kilns are also up there. So this sort of data is now going to become available to each of you. You'll be able to compare yourselves against your peers, and you'll be able to compare your technologies against other firing technologies. We're going to, as Nico said, have a roadshow, and more of this detail will be rolled out. The data is vast. Incidentally, the red blocks there indicate high or high range on each of those parameters. The greens, as you might expect, are low impact. So each of your firing technologies has environmental impacts, some less than others, and it'll be, I'm sure, useful to you, to those of you who are making decisions about perhaps changing your firing technology as you move. And as per that very exciting debate which was held before tea, indicates that many of you are prepared to make moves to improve your environmental performance, perhaps. So how will we realize these LCA benefits? The roadshow has been mentioned, and this is going to be an opportunity for you to invite your publics in each of your areas, the local authorities, government bodies, the significant clients, the architects, etc. We need to get them all there. I think further down the line we'll find that trying to compare products requires something like the Sustainable Building Material Index. And when we start to compare some of these IBTs or ABTs, whatever they are, against clay brick, On a fair basis, we will have to use some sort of tool such as this index. Also, for those of you following a process of continuous improvement in your plants, you now have benchmarks. But fundamentally, let's call them selling points, which come out of this study for clay brick, are specifically that solid masonry solutions for offices and daytime occupancy buildings come out top, certainly from an energy efficiency and from an environmental impact point of view. It's perhaps surprising to learn this. I think everybody might have expected that insulated wall versions would be shown to be the lowest in energy usage, but it's not the case. And it has to do with our climate, I think. It's the large fluctuations in temperature that we have, particularly in the interior, that buildings have time to cool down overnight. Because many of your offices and daytime occupancy buildings are occupant driven. It's the lighting and the human activity load which has to be voided by these buildings. In residential buildings, an opposite conclusion is reached, and that is that thermal insulation in a cavity wall is by far the best solution. And basically, the more insulation in that cavity, the better the result. And this is going to drive our strategy, our tactics in standards arena as we try and convince others around the tables in these forums that we can do better for our national environmental footprint by moving towards cavity walling in residential buildings. But selling this thermal performance study and the good results from it is now a real possibility. Just to give you an idea of how some of these results pan out, here's the picture for non-residential buildings. And there are 6 groups there which correspond to 6 climatic regions. And you'll see the trend that virtually consistent across all of those 6 climatic zones, that the solid clay brick wall, always on the left of each of those groups, is the lowest energy user. Non-residential buildings, folks. It's mainly a cooling requirement. There's relatively little heating required in these office buildings and institutional buildings. If I can move to the residential picture, it's totally different. Here you're thinking about buildings which are operated perhaps mainly on a 24-hour basis. So heating becomes quite an important issue. And here there's a trend which is consistent across all 6 climatic zones again. And that is that and if you look at each group of 6, the first 3 on your left of each of those groups is the solid, the cavity, and the insulated cavity. So you can see as you add more insulation to your double masonry wall, you get a better and lower energy usage. And this really is a strong basis for advancing the argument for cavity wall insulation in the standards and building regulations arena. Okay, that's just to reiterate those points, that in the residential environment, the clay brick insulated product is top. The hollow concrete block wall is consistently the worst. So unfortunately, government hasn't seen its way yet to putting more money into walling. Unfortunately, that will mean that we will be burdening the poorer people in our community with inefficient housing. It's rather a sad admission to have to make. In the non-residential market, it is the 220 solid clay brick masonry wall cavity on the coast, which is the best performer. And it's interesting here in this market that the light steel frame product does not perform at all well. So the IBTs, the ABTs have their challenges to meet us on a fair playground. Okay, there has been some progress on the socio-economic project, and I was hoping to have a more concrete interim report in my hand by the time of this report, but it has not reached me yet. But I'm confident that Worley Parsons, being the credible firm that they are, will have some good work for us. The plus point is that we managed to get an economic assessment exercise coming out of this project as a kind of bonus. Worley Parsons, having a strong economic department, have thrown that in. Think-Brig cooperation. It is a bit of a hope of mine at the moment that the data sitting at the University of Newcastle, this is on studies of some small buildings which they've had for some 8 or 10 years, is going to help us validate some of the results that we've got out of the thermal performance study. I must emphasize that the thermal performance study is a software-based analysis, and we need to ensure that real life actually correlates with the software in order to ensure that it's absolutely unimpeachable. But if we can do this, and as a result, we're looking for any data out there, measured results on buildings, and we should gobble those up and analyze them and see whether, again, the empirical evidence supports the software-generated modeling results. All right, so this roadshow is going to be really important to realize the benefits of your investment in these research works, and I believe that the Sustainable Building Material Index, which you guys have paid for and developed, is really demonstrating some leadership, and other industries must surely pick up on something like this in order to compare one system against another from an environmental perspective. And then fundamentally, we've got some really good news from the thermal performance study, which will enhance your sales story out there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.